Judge orders Black General to remove her honor medal. What happened next ruined her career. The words burned through General Maya Mitchell's mind as she stood before the judge, her heart pounding in her chest. The courtroom, once filled with tension and the smell of polished wood and high-stakes politics, had turned into a cold, alienating chamber of whispers and disbelief. "Remove your medal, General." The words echoed in her ears as though they were coming from far away, too distant to be real. But there it was, undeniable. The weight of the medal hanging from her neck felt like it was pressing down on her, suffocating her. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but no words came. The judge's gaze never wavered as he looked down at her with cold indifference. The room was silent, all eyes fixed on her. Maya glanced around. Her colleagues, her friends, the press, everyone waiting, watching. Her hand trembled slightly as it moved toward the ribbon of the medal. It had been earned through years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. The honor she had poured her soul into now felt like a cruel joke. She hesitated, but only for a moment. If she resisted, she knew it wouldn't end well. Her career, her honor, everything she had worked for would be torn down in a heartbeat. Maya pulled the medal from her neck, her fingers grazing the cold metal one last time. The courtroom seemed to shift, the air heavy with unspoken questions. She could feel their eyes on her as she held the medal in her hand, a symbol of everything she had achieved and everything she was about to lose. The judge didn't flinch. "You may go, General." As she turned to leave, her legs felt like lead, her breath shallow and tight in her chest. She had done what they asked, but the sting of humiliation still burned. Was this really the end? And what was it all for? The journey to this moment had started long before the courtroom. Maya Mitchell hadn't just earned her place in the Army, she'd fought for it. Growing up in a small town outside of Atlanta, Maya was no stranger to struggle. Her mother had worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Her father had been a soldier, quiet, distant, but always steadfast. From him, she learned that honor wasn't given. It was earned, sometimes at great personal cost. But Maya had dreams that stretched far beyond the life of an ordinary child. She watched the Army commercials on TV, imagining herself in uniform, fighting for something bigger than herself. The idea of leading, of making a difference, ignited a fire in her that couldn't be extinguished. It wasn't easy. As a Black woman, she was constantly questioned, doubted, and tested in ways her white counterparts were not. Still, she pushed through, proving herself again and again. She rose through the ranks with unwavering dedication, earning each stripe with relentless discipline. When the call came to serve in elite units, she answered with pride, determined to shatter the stereotypes that tried to define her. She had been at the top of her game. The medal that now sat in her hand was a symbol of that achievement, a reminder of her years of sacrifice, of her journey from the streets of Atlanta to the battlefield. But that was before everything had changed. Maya sat in her office late one night, the glow of her computer screen casting long shadows across the room. The war was over, but the battles weren't. The political climate was shifting, becoming more hostile toward military leaders like her. The rise of divisive rhetoric, the growing tensions in the country, it was all starting to take its toll. Maya had always been able to focus on the mission, on the men and women she led, on the next operation. But now, things were different. The weight of the job, the expectations, the scrutiny, it was all beginning to wear on her. She ran her fingers through her hair and sighed. There had been whispers, rumors that had reached her ears, that she was a liability. Too ambitious. Too outspoken. Too everything. It didn't matter that she had led with integrity, that she had fought for the country and its ideals. The powers that be had already decided what they wanted from her. And it wasn't long before they had their excuse. The first incident had come out of nowhere. A routine debriefing after a mission, a simple conversation about a possible reassignment, and suddenly the air had been thick with accusations. Insubordination, they said. Disrespect to her superiors, they claimed. Maya had never been one to shy away from speaking her mind, especially when it came to strategy or military operations. She had always prided herself on being a leader who could think critically, who wasn't afraid to challenge conventional wisdom if it meant the success of the mission. But those same qualities that had earned her respect on the battlefield had now turned against her in the eyes of the powers that controlled the narrative. Her career began to unravel slowly at first. Quiet whispers in the hallways, a sudden lack of support from higher-ups, and then the public smear campaign. The once revered General Maya Mitchell was now a liability, someone the press could target, someone who the military establishment could distance themselves from. The room was full now, and Maya's eyes shifted uneasily from face to face as the judge continued speaking. The next few weeks felt like a blur. The pressure was relentless. The media had caught wind of her case, and it seemed as though every move she made was under a microscope. Stories were written, questions asked, but none of it felt real anymore. She was no longer the accomplished, respected leader she had once been. She was the target of a much larger game, one that she didn't fully understand. By the time the order came to remove her honor medal, she knew she was already losing everything. But why? Why had they singled her out? Her hands shook as she made her way out of the courtroom. The question still lingered in her mind. What had she done to deserve this? Maya stepped into the quiet hallway, the door of the courtroom still echoing behind her. The weight of the medal in her hand felt heavier than it ever had before. She was still processing the judge's words, his unyielding authority, the humiliation of the moment. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate. She didn't want to look up, didn't want to meet the eyes of the reporters waiting outside. But the reality of the situation was already sinking in. She could hear the whispers before she even reached them. How could they do that to her? One voice muttered. Too ambitious, another added. The only thing keeping her afloat was that medal. Now look at her, came a harsh, biting tone. She could feel their gazes on her as she walked past, could almost feel their judgment clawing at her back. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. She had never cried in front of the media before, and she wasn't about to start now. She made her way out of the building, her heart still racing. The night air was cool, but it did nothing to soothe her. Her car was waiting, but she didn't make her way toward it immediately. Instead, she walked a few steps farther, trying to clear her head. The streets of the city were bustling with life, the noise of traffic and people filling the space around her. But she felt isolated. Alone. What had just happened? She'd fought for this, fought for her place in this world, fought for respect. But now, she was an outcast, a spectacle. And still, the question loomed over her. Why? Maya didn't return to her office the next day. She couldn't. She couldn't face the looks of pity or derision, couldn't sit in that chair, in that building, knowing what had just been taken from her. So instead, she found herself at home, sitting in the quiet of her apartment, staring at the television screen but not really watching it. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of the honor medal on the table in front of her. She had told herself, over and over, that she would never let her emotions get in the way of her work. But now, the truth was undeniable. Her career was hanging by a thread. She couldn't escape the whispers, the assumptions that were already forming about her. How long until they started calling her a disgrace? A failed experiment? The phone rang, breaking through her thoughts. She grabbed it on the second ring, her voice a little more strained than she intended. Maya, it was Colonel Harris. He had been her mentor for years, a steady, grounded presence in her life. But even now, she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. What is it? She asked, trying to steady her breath. He paused for a long time before continuing. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm so sorry. This whole situation, it's not right. She exhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. I don't even know what's happening anymore. I've been in this game long enough to know when I'm being set up, but this feels different. I know, Harris said softly. Listen, Maya, I've known you since you were just starting out. You've done more for the military than most people can even comprehend. But there's something bigger happening here, something behind the scenes. You've got to be careful. Bigger. Maya's voice cracked slightly, frustration building. What the hell are you talking about? What could be bigger than this? I don't know, but I'm hearing things. People are talking about making an example of you. You're not the first to go through something like this, but it's personal for some of them. Maya leaned back, her head spinning. Who's behind this? I can't say. But watch your back, Maya. They're not going to stop with the medal. This is just the beginning. She hung up without saying goodbye. She felt numb. What had she gotten herself into? Who were these people she couldn't even see, the ones pulling strings in the dark? The next few days were a blur of endless meetings with lawyers, constant media attention, and pressure from people she once considered friends. The public narrative was already being written, and Maya was powerless to stop it. Articles popped up one after the other, each one painting her as a controversial figure, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in the military. The whispers had become roars, louder and louder every day. She hadn't been able to get through a single phone call without someone questioning her loyalty, her competence, her character. Even her closest allies were starting to pull away, not wanting to be caught up in the fallout. At night, Maya sat alone in her apartment, the weight of it all suffocating her. She had always been able to see a way forward, a solution to every problem. But now, everything felt uncertain, like she was slipping into a place she couldn't escape. And then, as if the universe was mocking her, there was a knock on the door. She opened it, half expecting another reporter, another headline to haunt her. But it wasn't. It was her old friend, Sergeant Elena Torres, standing on her doorstep, looking worn, tired, but determined. "Elena." Maya's voice cracked as she stepped aside to let her in. Elena walked in, her gaze serious. "Maya, we need to talk." "What's going on? Is this about the hearing?" Maya's voice was frantic. "No, it's about something much bigger." Elena sat down across from her, her face grave. "This isn't just about you, Maya. There are people pulling strings, people who don't want you in the position you're in. This goes far beyond the courtroom." Maya's breath hitched. "Who?" Elena leaned forward, her eyes dark. "I don't have all the answers yet, but I know they're after more than your career. They're trying to break you. And if you don't fight back soon, they'll win." Maya's mind spun, the question now louder than ever. Who was behind this, and why? And, more terrifyingly, how far would they go to bring her down? Maya's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The questions Elena had just dropped felt like stones sinking into her chest. "Break me," Maya whispered. "What does that even mean?" Elena's eyes were steely, resolute. "They're using everything they've got to make sure you don't come back from this. It's not just the military. They've got bigger plans, and you're in the way." Maya felt a chill run through her. Her hands, still holding the honor medal, trembled slightly as she set it down on the table between them. She had thought the removal of the medal was the worst thing that could happen. She had thought it was just a symbolic gesture. But now, Elena's words sank deep. If what she was saying was true, this was only the beginning of something far darker. "How do you know all this?" Maya asked, her voice strained. Her mind raced, trying to piece everything together. Elena leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "I've heard things, Maya. Conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. People you trust, people in power. There are factions within the military, and I think they're using your case to send a message to the rest of us. If you're going down, they want to make sure it's loud, and it's messy. They want to destroy everything you've worked for." Maya's mind was spinning. She had spent years pushing through the barriers others had set in front of her, overcoming prejudice and doubt. The thought that the very institution she had given her life to might be conspiring against her, it was too much to process all at once. "I can't just sit back and let them do this," Maya said, her voice hardening. "I need to know who they are, Elena. Who's behind this? Who's pulling the strings?" Elena hesitated, her face shadowed with uncertainty. "I don't have the full picture yet, but I think it's higher than we realize. It's not just some random political move. It's personal. I've heard talk about how your rise through the ranks threatened a lot of people. People who thought they could control things." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying someone in the upper echelons of the military wants me gone?" Elena nodded slowly. "I'm afraid so. But don't let that scare you. You've faced worse. We just need to be smart about this." Maya stood up, pacing the floor. "Smart about it? How?" "I'm being publicly dismantled. I've had my medal taken from me. They've made a spectacle out of me. And now you're telling me there's a shadow war going on behind the scenes that I don't even understand." Her voice was rising, frustration clawing at her. "What am I supposed to do with that?" Elena's gaze softened, and she stood, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "We fight back. We find the truth, piece by piece. You've always been a fighter. You can't let them turn you into something you're not. You're not a villain, and you're not going down like this." Maya took a long breath, trying to steady herself. She had always fought with purpose. Every mission, every goal, every promotion had been earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But now, the rules had changed. She wasn't just fighting a war on the battlefield. She was fighting for her life, her career, and her very identity. And the people responsible for this, she wasn't going to let them win. But Elena's warning kept echoing in her mind. It's not just the military. They want to destroy everything you've built. They want you broken. The next few days were a blur of frantic research, late-night phone calls, and covert meetings. Maya knew she couldn't trust anyone. The walls were closing in, and she had to find out who was behind this, who had orchestrated the downfall of her career. It wasn't just the media, the politicians, or the whispers within the military. It was something much deeper, something that had set its sights on her and her career for a long time. She spent hours combing through old files, making calls to old contacts, trying to get a glimpse of the hidden players in this game. But it was as if someone had covered their tracks too well. Every lead she followed turned into a dead end, and every conversation seemed to be more of the same, questions and no answers. Then, one evening, a breakthrough came. She was sitting at her kitchen table when her phone buzzed. The name on the screen was a familiar one, Captain Rachel Dawson, one of her most trusted allies and a fellow soldier. "General, I've got something," Rachel said, her voice tight with urgency. "I don't have much time, but I think I found a connection. There's something going on in the background. Someone's pulling the strings, but it's not just about you. It's bigger than that." Maya's heart skipped. "What do you mean? Who's behind this, Rachel?" "I'm still putting it together, but I found an account tied to the higher-ups in the military. It's not just the usual suspects, Maya. This is connected to a lot of different players, politicians, defense contractors, people who stand to lose a lot if the military stays on the current path. They need someone to take the fall, and they're using you as the scapegoat." Maya's mind raced. This was it. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. The pieces were finally starting to fit together. "And you think I'm their target?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and determination. "Yes, you were climbing too fast. Your success, the way you led, someone saw that as a threat. You weren't just a soldier. You were changing the narrative. You were becoming a symbol of what the military could be if it evolved." Rachel paused, and Maya could hear her breath quicken. "They can't have that." Maya's chest tightened. She felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice, but now, at least, she had a direction. The truth was coming into focus. "How do we stop them?" Maya asked, her voice steely. "We go public," Rachel said without hesitation. "We expose them. But we need to be careful. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it gets. Are you ready for that?" Maya's fingers gripped the table as she stared at the honor medal lying between them. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just a symbol of her achievements. It was a symbol of the fight ahead. She had already lost so much, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going down without a fight. "Let's do it," Maya said, her voice resolute. "Let's bring them down." And with that, the quiet war within the military had just begun. But Maya knew one thing. The battle for her career was only the beginning. The plan was simple, but Maya knew it was going to be anything but easy. Exposing the conspiracy would require not just proof, but precise timing. She could feel the weight of each decision pressing on her. Every move now was critical, every choice carrying the potential to either unravel her or ignite a firestorm that would bring the corrupt players to their knees. She spent the next few days with Rachel, combing through everything they could find. They pored over financial records, military contracts, emails, anything that could give them a trail to follow. It wasn't enough to just expose the military conspirators. They had to find the connections between the politicians, the defense contractors, the ones pulling the strings. At times, the task felt insurmountable. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Yet, Maya couldn't back down. She wasn't just fighting for her career anymore. She was fighting for the truth. And as Rachel pointed out, the truth was far more powerful than any medal she had ever worn. They worked in secrecy, meeting in dimly lit rooms, always making sure they weren't followed. Maya had long ago learned how to move in the shadows when necessary. She wasn't naive enough to think that the people who wanted her destroyed wouldn't be watching. But then, one evening, the breakthrough came. "Look at this," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was holding up a printout, her face lit by the glow of her laptop. Maya leaned in, her pulse quickening. On the page was a set of emails that had been sent from an anonymous account, an account traced back to the Department of Defense, but the contents were even more damning. The emails detailed a plan to dismantle Maya's career, all while the higher-ups in the military worked in tandem with lobbyists and key political figures to redirect military contracts and influence policy. They were using her as a pawn. Her downfall was a necessary part of their bigger game. They've been planning this for months, Maya muttered, her mind racing. But why me? Why make an example out of me? Rachel frowned, looking over the emails once more. You were rising too fast. You're everything they didn't want the military to become, a woman, a black woman, rising to the top. They couldn't control you, Maya. You were changing things. Maya's heart was hammering in her chest, but there was a cold determination behind her gaze now. She wasn't just fighting to clear her name anymore. This went beyond her. This was about exposing the system that had been set up to crush anyone who didn't fit the mold. We go public now, Maya said, her voice hard. We don't wait any longer. Rachel hesitated, glancing at the laptop again, as if weighing the consequences. You're sure? This is going to shake everything to its core. I'm sure, Maya replied. If we don't do this now, it's over. They'll destroy everyone they've targeted and go on to the next. We have to stop them. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. They contacted a trusted investigative journalist, someone they both knew could help them get the story out without it being buried under layers of bureaucracy. The reporter, a sharp-witted woman named Allison Wade, had a reputation for taking on powerful institutions, even when it meant risking everything. She understood the stakes. The first round of articles was cautious, cryptic, a mere teaser to see if they could get traction. But the moment the emails came to light, the world exploded. The headlines were everywhere. Military corruption exposed. Scandal hits the highest echelons of power. Black general at center of conspiracy to thwart military reform, corruption, lies, and betrayal. General's honor medal just the beginning of deep-rooted scandal. Within hours, the media frenzy was all-consuming. Maya could barely keep up with the deluge of interviews, demands, and pressure from every angle. But amidst it all, she saw something she hadn't seen in weeks: hope. People were talking about her, not as a villain, but as someone who had fought against a broken system. They were finally starting to see her for what she was, someone who refused to be crushed, someone who stood for integrity. But the fight was far from over. She knew the backlash would come, the attempts to discredit her, to tear down the story, to silence her. She wasn't naive. The people behind this had power, and they wouldn't go down easily. Maya stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, the bright lights casting harsh shadows across her face. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman who had been through hell and come out the other side, scarred but not broken. She was still wearing her uniform, the same one she had worn so many times before, but now it felt different. It wasn't just the uniform of a soldier anymore. It was a symbol of her resilience, of everything she was fighting for. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the message. General Mitchell. The message began, and her heart skipped a beat. We need to talk. There's been a change in the orders. We're pulling out all the stops to ensure this story is buried. Don't think this is over yet. Maya's blood ran cold. She knew who it was from. It was the first sign of retaliation, but it only made her resolve stronger. She couldn't back down now. This was no longer about her career. It was about exposing the truth, no matter what it cost. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Maya and Rachel continued their efforts, working with the journalist, feeding the media more information about the military-industrial complex that had manipulated the entire narrative. Slowly, more pieces of the puzzle came together, revealing the names of high-ranking officials, politicians, and defense contractors who had all been in on the scheme. The truth, once hidden behind layers of deception, was finally coming to light. But as the story gained momentum, so did the pressure on Maya. The military leadership, once her allies, now turned their backs. They issued a statement condemning her actions, calling her betrayal unacceptable. Public opinion swung wildly, with some people hailing her as a hero, while others labeled her a traitor. The backlash was fierce, but it only fueled Maya's determination. She wasn't going to let them bury her, or the truth. One night, as she sat in her apartment, watching the latest broadcast on the unfolding scandal, the phone rang again. General, the voice on the other end said, "We've got them. We've got the evidence." Her breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. "Is it enough?" she asked, her voice steady. "Enough to bring them down." Maya stood up, feeling the surge of adrenaline course through her. This was her moment. The truth was about to be exposed on a scale that no one could deny. And then, as she prepared for the final push, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a video. She opened it, her heart skipping a beat as she watched the screen. It was a video of herself, speaking at a press conference months ago, back when everything seemed certain. But in the background, a shadowy figure stood watching. The video ended with a chilling message. "The war is far from over, General. You've made your choice. Now we make ours." Her hands trembled as she watched the final frame. And for the first time since this all began, Maya Mitchell realized that the battle ahead was far from finished. They weren't just after her career. They were after her very life. Maya's heart raced, her fingers gripping the phone tighter as the last words of the video echoed in her mind. "We make ours." Who was behind the figure? Who knew about this video? And why were they sending it to her now? The sense of foreboding that had been creeping into her bones for weeks suddenly felt like a living, breathing thing. Something far worse than her career was at stake now. She wasn't just fighting for her reputation anymore. She was fighting to survive. Her mind raced, trying to piece together everything she knew. The military-industrial complex, the conspiracy, the corrupt politicians, the orchestrated smear campaign. But who? Who had the power to dig this deep, to send a message so chilling? Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. She didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. "Rachel, what's going on, Maya?" Rachel's voice crackled with concern over the line. "I've been hearing whispers about you, about the video. Is everything okay?" Maya inhaled sharply, her mind still reeling from the images in the video. She had to stay focused, had to control her emotions. She could feel the walls closing in. "Rachel, I need you to trace something for me. A video. It's a threat, and it's connected to everything we've been uncovering. Someone's trying to scare me, but we need to figure out who's behind it before it's too late." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Rachel's voice was firm, determined. "I'll get on it. We're not backing down. You've already fought too hard to let them intimidate you." Maya nodded, though she knew Rachel couldn't see her. "Thanks. But Rachel, something's changed. I don't think this is just a game anymore. They're not just going after me to ruin my career. They want to destroy everything I've worked for, everything I've fought for. This is bigger than I thought." "I know," Rachel replied quietly. "I've been getting the same sense. But listen, Maya, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. We've exposed them. Now they're scared. And when they're scared, that's when they make mistakes. We're going to catch them, and we're going to bring them down." Maya didn't respond right away, but the words settled into her chest, some of the weight lifting. She was still scared. There was so much she didn't understand, so much that felt out of her control. But one thing was certain, she couldn't stop now. Not when the truth was finally within reach. The next few days were a blur of activity. Rachel worked tirelessly, gathering intel and hacking through layers of security, trying to uncover the identities of the players behind the scenes. She was meticulous, methodical, but even Rachel's skills couldn't move fast enough. Every time they thought they had a lead, it would vanish before they could act. But Maya wouldn't let herself falter. She had come too far to stop now. She sat at her kitchen table, looking over the evidence they had gathered, piecing things together like a jigsaw puzzle. There were moments when it felt like everything was spinning out of control, but she refused to let herself give in to fear. She had faced down much worse on the battlefield, and she wouldn't let this be the one battle she lost. Then it happened. Maya's phone buzzed, a message from Rachel flashing on the screen. "We've got them. Check your email." Her hands shook as she opened her inbox. The email was brief, the subject line enough to make her heart skip a beat. The final piece. Attached was a video. It was a recording of a high-level meeting. The faces were all blurred out, but the voices were unmistakable. Voices she recognized. Voices of those who had been behind her public shaming, her career's sudden derailment. It was them, the military higher-ups, the politicians, the defense contractors, all conspiring together to manipulate the system for their own gain. Her stomach twisted as the video played. She could hear the conversations, the threats, the plans laid out to dismantle her and keep their grip on power. It was even more horrifying than she had imagined. They were planning to stage her complete destruction, a public trial, criminal charges, the whole 9 yards, to silence her once and for all. Maya's breath quickened as she leaned closer to the screen, her mind racing. They had tried to crush her spirit, but this This was worse than anything she had anticipated. This wasn't just a game to them. It was an operation, and she was the target. She watched, gritting her teeth, until the video ended. The final words, from a voice she recognized as a senior senator, echoed in her mind. Once she's out of the picture, the rest will fall into line. She'll be a cautionary tale, someone who got too big, too fast, and paid the price for it. Her career is over. Maya felt the weight of those words settle over her. They had made their move, but she had one chance to make hers. By the time Rachel arrived at her apartment that night, Maya was already pacing the floor. The video had been sent to the press, their final piece of evidence. It wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about survival. "They're planning to destroy me, Rachel," Maya said, her voice hoarse. "They've been planning it all along. This isn't just a matter of political power. It's personal. They want to erase me from history." Rachel didn't flinch. "They've already made a huge mistake. They underestimated you. And now we have them." Maya's eyes met Rachel's, full of resolve. "We need to take them down. But it has to be now. We can't wait any longer." Rachel's eyes hardened. "We go public with everything. The full video. We expose their lies, their manipulation, their corruption. And we do it in a way they can't stop. We hit them where it hurts, the truth." Maya nodded. There was no more time for hesitation. The video had shown the world what they were really capable of. But this wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about taking them down, exposing the whole system. They had tried to destroy her, but she wasn't going to let them. She was going to fight back. She was going to make sure they knew that no one could erase her. No one would erase her truth. And just before they went public, a chilling realization hit her. This was the point of no return. Once the story was out there would be no going back. But for the first time in weeks, Maya felt a sense of clarity. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She wouldn't just survive this. She would win. The next morning, the media storm erupted like a thunderclap. Maya's phone rang incessantly. Calls from reporters, former colleagues, and government officials, all scrambling for their own piece of the story. The email with the video had gone viral faster than she had anticipated. The military-industrial complex's dirty laundry was now out in the open for the world to see, and there was no turning back. But Maya didn't feel relief. She felt the familiar rush of battle, the adrenaline of confrontation mixed with the raw weight of the unknown. She was no longer fighting just for her career. She was fighting for truth, for justice, and for every person who had ever been silenced by those in power. Maya sat at her kitchen table, staring at the flood of messages, but her mind was somewhere else. The fight wasn't over. The true battle was just beginning. The forces arrayed against her were powerful, and they were already moving to contain the fallout. But she knew that now, with the truth out there, they were no longer the ones in control. Rachel had called her just a few hours before, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Maya, I'm hearing rumors. People are already scrambling. The senator's office is trying to downplay everything. But they're panicking, I can tell. We've got them on the ropes." But Maya wasn't so sure. "We've exposed them, yes. But the real fight starts now. They won't go down easily. We have to hit harder. We have to take everything they've built and tear it down." Rachel's voice was firm on the other end of the line. "You've got the truth, Maya. They can't hide that. This is bigger than any smear campaign or cover-up they can throw at you." Maya nodded to herself, determined but aware of the risk. They weren't just exposing corruption anymore. They were exposing a system that was deeply entrenched, one that would fight to protect itself at all costs. The next few days were a blur of press conferences, high-stakes meetings, and furious planning. Maya knew every moment counted. They couldn't afford to wait for the truth to sink in. It had to spread like wildfire. As she stood at the podium during her first public address, Maya's breath caught in her chest. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, the air heavy with tension. For a moment, she couldn't help but feel a wave of uncertainty. But then, she saw it. The same look in the eyes of the reporters that had been in her soldier's eyes during her first deployment. Respect. Not because of her uniform, not because of her medal, but because of the truth she was about to speak. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady, amplified by the microphone. "I stand here today not as a general, not as a symbol, but as a person. A person who has fought to serve this country. A person who has been betrayed by the very institutions I vowed to protect. And today, I will not let that betrayal stand. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The room fell silent, every person hanging on her every syllable. These past few weeks, we have witnessed a systematic effort to silence, to destroy, and to manipulate. For months, those in power conspired behind closed doors to target me and others who sought to reform and uplift the military, because we were a threat to the status quo. The truth has come out, and I will not allow it to be buried under layers of lies and deceit. The cameras flashed again as she continued, her words sharp, clear, unflinching. They wanted me broken. They wanted me erased. But I'm not just a general who's been torn down. I am the story of every man and woman who has ever been marginalized, silenced, or ignored. This is not just about me. It is about every person who has fought for what is right, who has fought against the tide of corruption, who has put their life on the line for the greater good. She took a steadying breath before finishing. They've been exposed, and the fight for accountability has only just begun. We won't stop until every last person who participated in this conspiracy is held accountable, no matter how high they sit. The room erupted into applause. The reporters rushed forward, their questions coming faster than Maya could process. But she stood tall, knowing the battle was far from won. Over the following weeks, the pressure continued to mount. The government issued a series of statements trying to downplay the scandal, claiming the video had been manipulated, that Maya's accusations were part of a larger political scheme to destabilize the military. But the evidence was undeniable. The truth had taken root, and with each passing day, it spread further. Maya was no longer just a scapegoat. She was a leader, a symbol of the fight for accountability in an institution that had long been allowed to operate unchecked. The investigations began in earnest, but Maya knew that they would need more than just the media's support. They needed action. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of interviews, Maya sat alone in her apartment, feeling the weight of it all. Her phone buzzed again, and she saw Rachel's name flash across the screen. "Maya," Rachel said breathlessly, "they're moving faster than we thought. I've got confirmation that some of the names we've been after are already being targeted. The military's top brass is trying to cover their tracks, but we've got them cornered. If we push now, we can force the government to move on them." Maya clenched her fists. "We push, but we don't just expose them. We bring down the whole system. We burn it to the ground." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then spoke with a hint of excitement in her voice. "That's the spirit. We do this right, Maya, and we change everything." The next few days were a blur of action. Maya was now at the helm of a movement. What had started as a fight for her career had turned into something much larger. The public had rallied behind her. Activists, veterans, even politicians who had once turned a blind eye were now standing in her corner. The truth was too powerful to ignore. And then, the unthinkable happened. A high-ranking general, once a key player in the conspiracy, came forward. He confessed to his involvement in the smear campaign against Maya, providing details on how the operation had been orchestrated, the political maneuvering, the money funneled into fake contracts, and the attempts to destroy her reputation. His testimony was the bombshell that brought the entire scandal to the surface, like a dam breaking open. The walls of corruption that had once seemed impenetrable began to crumble. Maya stood in front of the courtroom, her face calm, but inside, she could feel the fire of victory. The trial was about to begin. She had made it this far, not just for herself, but for all the people who had suffered under a system that rewarded deceit and punished truth. As she walked into the courtroom, she didn't look back. She wasn't the same woman who had entered that courtroom months ago, humiliated, broken. She was stronger now, unyielding. The fight was over, and she had won. But deep down, Maya knew the real battle had only just begun. For the first time, the country was finally asking the right questions. What was wrong with a system that protected corruption at the highest level? And more importantly, who would rise to fight for real change? As the trial began, Maya took her seat with one thought in her mind. This wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about rewriting the rules, starting with her. And no one would be able to stop her. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of anticipation and skepticism as the trial officially began. Maya sat near the front, her posture upright, her expression a carefully crafted mask of calm. But inside, she was a storm, every fiber of her being alive with the knowledge of what was at stake. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about holding people accountable, about demanding change in an institution that had long been allowed to run unchecked. The accused sat across from her, military officials, political figures, and the corporate executives whose names had been hidden in the shadows until now. But the weight of their arrogance was palpable. They hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined a woman like Maya Mitchell could rise up and expose them for the criminals they were. They had underestimated her, and now they were paying the price. The room fell silent as the judge entered, and the proceedings began. Maya had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, revisiting every email, every piece of evidence that had been uncovered, rehashing every interview, every moment when she had been forced to defend herself. But this was different. This was the reckoning. This was her chance to make sure that no one would ever be able to manipulate the system the way they had again. The prosecutor stood up first. He was a seasoned veteran of high-profile cases, but his demeanor was tentative, unsure of how to approach someone like Maya, someone who had become a symbol of defiance. "General Mitchell," the prosecutor began, his voice slightly strained. "You've made an incredible impact with your courage and resilience. But today, we are here not just to expose the corruption in the system. We are here to make sure that those responsible are held accountable for their actions. We start with you." Maya's breath caught in her throat for a moment. This was it. This was the moment when the full extent of her fight would be laid bare. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but the stakes had never been higher. "I've always believed in accountability," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But accountability has to start with those in power, the ones who have the ability to break the rules and get away with it. We've seen what happens when those in positions of authority think they are untouchable." The prosecutor nodded solemnly, setting the tone for the opening statements. But as the trial unfolded, something unexpected happened, something Maya hadn't anticipated. The defense came out swinging. Their tactics were aggressive, personal, and merciless. They tried to undermine Maya's credibility, questioning her motives, accusing her of grandstanding, of making the story about her. They painted her as a disgruntled soldier with an agenda, a woman who had been too ambitious, too vocal, too determined. But Maya didn't flinch. Every word they threw at her was just another bullet point in a campaign she had been fighting her entire life. They called her an opportunist, a liability, a divisive figure. But with every accusation, she stood taller. She had been in the trenches before, faced down much worse than mere words. These attacks were nothing more than the last desperate gasps of a corrupt system trying to save itself. And she wasn't going to let it. It wasn't long before the turning point arrived. The courtroom was tense as the defense tried to discredit the evidence. They questioned the authenticity of the emails, dismissed the testimony of the whistleblowers who had come forward, and tried to argue that Maya's revelations were part of a political attack to destabilize the military. But just as they thought they had cornered her, Maya's team presented a document that would change everything. It was a confidential government memo, one that linked high-ranking officials directly to the conspiracy. The memo had been passed between some of the key players involved, outlining their efforts to push through corrupt military contracts in exchange for political favors. The very thing the defense had dismissed as a smear campaign was now in front of the court, irrefutable proof of a coordinated effort to undermine the military and its core values. Maya watched as the faces in the courtroom shifted. There was no denying it anymore. The evidence spoke for itself. The defense team tried to discredit the document, but it was no use. The entire room could see that the conspiracy had been far larger than they'd ever imagined. The corrupt officials in the room who had tried to hide behind their power were now exposed. There was no going back. The judge looked up at the defense, his expression hardening. "This is a serious matter, and I expect every individual here to take responsibility for their actions. There will be consequences for those who think they can abuse their positions for personal gain." The room went quiet. The tide had turned. In the days that followed, Maya's victory was not just in the courtroom. It was on every news station, in every headline. The military-industrial complex was reeling from the revelations. Names were being called into question, resignations followed, and investigations began at a scale not seen in years. Maya had become something far greater than a symbol. She had become the face of a movement that wasn't just about one woman fighting for her career, but about the need to hold the powerful accountable. She had set off a chain reaction that was rippling across the entire structure of power, exposing the deep-rooted corruption that had been festering for decades. But Maya didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. As the media buzzed with the news, Maya sat quietly in her office, staring at the picture on her desk. It was a photo of her mother and father, taken years ago, when she was still a young girl, wide-eyed and full of dreams. Her mother had taught her to fight for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. Her father had shown her the value of honor, even in the face of adversity. Their voices, their lessons, had guided her through this entire journey. But now, as the battle reached its final stages, Maya couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. She had fought so hard to get here, but the cost had been high. She had lost friends along the way. She had lost trust in institutions she had once believed in. She had lost her sense of safety, her certainty about what the future would hold. But she hadn't lost her spirit. That fire, the one that had carried her through every obstacle, every challenge, every setback, was still burning bright. And she knew that, no matter what happened next, she would continue to fight. Because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and the forces she had just exposed wouldn't go quietly. But Maya Mitchell was done running, done being silenced. She had found her voice, and she would never let it be taken from her again. The change she had started was only just beginning. The days after the trial were a whirlwind of change, and Maya found herself at the center of a national reckoning. The ripple effect from her exposure of the military-industrial complex had set off a wave of investigations, resignations, and public outcry. The power structures that had once seemed so immovable were now on shaky ground. For the first time in years, the media was focusing on something other than the military's image. They were focusing on the truth. But Maya knew that the fight wasn't over. The system had been shaken, but not broken. Her victory was a beginning, not an end. A week after the trial, Maya was called to testify before a Senate committee. She had already known this was coming. The power players, those she had exposed, wanted to undermine her one last time, make her the scapegoat for a system that was unraveling faster than they could control. The committee was a chance for the opposition to try and restore their image, to place the blame on her rather than confront the rot at the heart of their institution. The chamber was filled with a mix of senators, lobbyists, and military officials. The air was thick with tension, but Maya's resolve hadn't wavered. She had been through too much to back down now. She stood, her uniform crisp, her posture commanding the room. But inside she was still that young girl from Atlanta, fighting, clawing for a future that had always seemed just out of reach. Senator Willard, a high-ranking member of the committee, opened the proceedings. "General Mitchell, thank you for coming today," he said, his voice polite but cold, the kind of cordiality that masked contempt. "We're here to discuss the scandal that has rocked the military. We've heard your testimony in the trial, but today, we need to know, what did you hope to achieve by airing these allegations publicly? Was it about your personal vendetta, or was there a deeper purpose?" Maya didn't flinch. She had prepared for this moment. "It was never about me, Senator," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "It was about exposing a system that had been broken for far too long. I wasn't the first to speak out about the corruption, but I was the one who had the courage to bring it into the light. I didn't do this for revenge or personal gain. I did it for every person who's been silenced, for every soldier who's been treated as expendable for the sake of profit." The room was silent, but the murmurs that followed weren't of disdain, they were of acknowledgement. There were those in the room who had known about the corruption but had been too afraid to speak out. Now, Maya was their voice. Senator Willard pressed further, his questions pointed, trying to discredit her and shift the blame back onto her. "But General, you are a member of the very system you now claim to decry. What makes you think you're the right person to lead this charge? What makes you different from the very people you seek to expose?" Maya's gaze didn't waver. "Because I've lived both sides of that system. I've been inside it. I've seen how it works, how it protects its own, and how it punishes those who speak the truth. But I also know that change is possible, even when the system seems insurmountable. I've always believed that the military, at its core, should serve the people, not special interests." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "And I will fight until I'm sure that we've made that vision a reality." After her testimony, the media swarmed with news stories, some condemning her actions, others applauding her bravery. But no one could deny the shift in the air. Maya had once been just another soldier, another officer in the ranks. Now, she was something more, an icon of change, someone who had taken on an institution and refused to back down. But the real challenge had yet to come. Her victory in court, the testimonies she had exposed, had forced the system into a corner, but there were still powerful people with connections in high places who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. They would fight to discredit her, to make her an example of what happens when you try to dismantle the status quo. Maya knew that. She could feel the weight of it, the pressure from all sides. And yet, she also knew one thing. She was no longer fighting alone. The people she had inspired, veterans, whistleblowers, politicians who were fed up with the corruption, were standing with her. Weeks later, Maya received a call that would change everything. It was from an old ally, General Pierce, someone she had served with during her first tours overseas. Pierce was a career military officer, but his loyalty to the truth had always been unwavering. Maya knew that he had been watching everything unfold from the sidelines, and when he called, she was both surprised and relieved. "Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've been watching everything, and I've seen the truth for myself. What they did to you, what they've been doing to all of us, it's not just about the money. It's about control, and it's time to take it back." "What do you mean?" Maya asked, her pulse quickening. "I'm not the only one who's been watching," Pierce replied. "We've started reaching out to the officers, the soldiers, the people who have been sidelined or pushed aside. There's a movement starting. It's time for a real change, Maya. We can't wait for the system to fix itself. We need to take action." Maya's heart raced as she absorbed the gravity of what Pierce was saying. He was talking about something much bigger than the corruption she had already exposed. He was talking about revolution, about reforming an entire system that had been built on exploitation and secrecy. "I'm in," she said without hesitation. "I didn't start this fight to stop halfway. If we're going to change the military, we have to take this all the way." Over the next few months, Maya and General Pierce began laying the groundwork for something far bigger. The movement they were building wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about transforming the military into an institution that truly served the people, that upheld its highest ideals without compromise. But it wasn't easy. There were challenges at every turn. Political opposition was fierce. The media that had once rallied behind her was now divided, some still supporting her, others questioning her methods. But one thing was clear. The battle for the soul of the military had just begun, and Maya Mitchell was ready to lead it. She was no longer just a general. She was a force for change, a symbol of what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself, something worth more than titles, medals, or accolades. It was about integrity. It was about the truth. And it was about making sure that no one, ever again, would be silenced for daring to speak it. Maya stood in front of the mirror one last time, staring at the woman who had fought and won, who had endured and now was beginning to rebuild. The woman who had started this fight not as a soldier, but as a voice. She wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. Maya stood in the quiet of her apartment, staring at the reflection in the mirror. The years of hard work, the sacrifices, the doubts, and the moments when everything seemed too overwhelming. It all led up to this point. She wasn't just looking at herself. She was looking at someone who had survived the impossible and was now standing on the edge of something even bigger. As much as the trials, the media frenzy, and the Senate hearings had taken their toll, they had also shaped her into the leader the military needed. Not the one who wore the uniform and followed the orders, but the one who questioned, challenged, and, when necessary, stood up and spoke out. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. She knew who it was before even looking. "Rachel." "Maya, we've got a serious problem." Rachel's voice crackled through the line, filled with urgency. "What's going on?" Maya asked, her tone immediately sharpening. "There's a push in Congress to overhaul the military leadership. Some of the higher-ups who've been caught up in the scandal are trying to make their move. They're trying to fast-track legislation that could stall any meaningful reforms. They're trying to suppress the movement you've started by discrediting the entire system of accountability that's been put in place since the trial," Rachel said, her voice growing tighter with each word. Maya's stomach churned. "So they're doubling down?" "Exactly. And they've got big names backing them. This could derail everything we've fought for." Maya closed her eyes, the weight of it all settling over her. "I knew this wouldn't be easy. But we can't let them pull the rug out from under us. Not now." Exactly. We've already got some leverage, both public and political. But this next move has to be decisive. The people are watching, Maya. We can't afford to back down. Maya stood taller, her decision firm. She wasn't going to let the system that had nearly destroyed her come back stronger. Get everyone we've been working with. We need to make sure this doesn't go unnoticed. We need to put pressure on those pushing the legislation. We've got the truth on our side. We're not going to let them bury it. Understood. I'll start reaching out to the contacts and strategizing. We're not backing down, not this time. Maya hung up, taking a long, slow breath. The fight wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about building something sustainable. It was about shaping an institution that valued integrity over power, transparency over secrecy. Over the next few days, Maya's life became a whirlwind of meetings, press conferences, and strategic planning. She and Rachel had quickly mobilized their allies, veterans, reformist politicians, civilian groups, all of whom had a stake in ensuring the military wouldn't continue down the path of corruption. But the opposition was organized, and they were relentless. The push for military reform had given birth to a new class of power brokers, people who saw the revelations Maya had uncovered as a threat to their livelihoods and influence. They needed to stifle it before it gained more momentum. Maya's team began to work tirelessly to gather support, calling in favors and alliances she had built throughout her career. They couldn't afford to lose this battle. They couldn't afford to let everything she had fought for go to waste. A week later, they held a press conference, one that would change the course of the next few months. Maya stood at the podium, a confident but weary figure, surrounded by key allies. Reporters from every major outlet were present, and the cameras were rolling. "Thank you for joining us today," Maya began, her voice steady but full of purpose. "As many of you know, the fight for reform in our military isn't just about the people in power being held accountable. It's about making sure that the voices of those who serve, the voices of those who risk their lives every day, are heard. For too long, the military-industrial complex has profited off the backs of our soldiers. For too long, it has turned a blind eye to the real values that should be guiding us: integrity, honor, and justice." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The attempt by certain officials in Congress to dismantle the reforms we've fought so hard for cannot stand. This is not a fight about politics. It's about the heart and soul of our military. And I will not allow those who have exploited it for their own benefit to take us backwards. She locked eyes with the cameras, her gaze unwavering. We will not allow them to bury the truth. We will not let them undo the progress we've made. And we will continue to fight for a system that works for every soldier, every person who puts their life on the line, and every American who believes in a fair and just military. The room was silent for a long moment, then erupted in a chorus of questions. Reporters fired off inquiries, some challenging her, others supportive. But Maya held her ground. She answered each question with poise, never shying away from the difficult topics. This time, she wasn't just a soldier. She was a leader of something bigger, a movement. In the following weeks, the pressure grew, but so did the support for Maya's cause. More whistleblowers came forward, more evidence was uncovered, and more voices joined the chorus demanding change. The movement had gained traction, and the opposition in Congress realized they were losing control of the narrative. But even as Maya's momentum built, there were moments of doubt. The fight was long and exhausting, and there were days when it felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She had already sacrificed so much: her reputation, her career, her sense of safety, and now she was risking even more. But every time she doubted, she remembered the faces of the soldiers she had led, the families who had sent loved ones off to war, and the millions of people who had quietly suffered at the hands of an untouchable military machine. She couldn't stop now, not when the stakes were so high. The final push came in the form of a public hearing. The committee responsible for the military reforms invited Maya to testify again, this time not just as a witness, but as a leader of the movement. It was the perfect moment to cement her legacy, to ensure that the changes she had fought for would survive. Maya stood before the committee, her uniform crisp, her posture unyielding. The room was filled with key members of Congress, military leaders, and a full gallery of press. "This is it," Rachel whispered from behind her. Maya nodded, her eyes focused on the faces in front of her. "Today," she said, her voice carrying with quiet power, we are faced with a choice. We can either continue down the path of corruption, where the few continue to profit at the expense of the many, or we can choose a different future. A future where accountability, transparency, and integrity are the foundation of everything we do. A future where the voices of the people who serve are not just heard, but respected. She let the silence hang in the air, knowing she had everyone's attention. We are not backing down, Maya continued. We will not be silenced. And we will ensure that the reforms we've fought for are not only preserved, but strengthened. The room was still. There was no question in Maya's mind that this was the turning point. Her fight, their fight, had reached a crucial moment, and she would see it through to the end. In the weeks that followed, the political landscape shifted. The bill that had been pushing back against military reforms was defeated, but more importantly, the reforms themselves were solidified. Maya's victory wasn't just in the courtroom or on the steps of the Senate. It was in every policy change that followed, every soldier who would benefit from the new, transparent system, and every family who could trust that the military would serve them as much as they served the country. Maya Mitchell had not only rebuilt her own career, she had changed the course of history. But, as she stood at the front of the movement, she knew this was only the beginning. There would be more battles ahead, more fights to ensure that the truth would always be heard. And she was ready for them. She had become something more than a general. She had become the embodiment of the change she had always believed in. The days after the final victory were quieter, but the sense of resolution that settled over Maya was different from what she'd expected. There were no grand celebrations, no confetti falling from the skies. There was just a calm satisfaction that the work she had started had finally paid off. The military reforms were in place, but they were fragile, held together by the weight of the past and the strength of the movement she had built. Maya knew that the fight wasn't over, but for now, a new chapter had begun. She spent her days traveling across the country, speaking with soldiers, veterans, and civilians. Her voice was still heard loud and clear, but now it was not just as a symbol of resistance. It was a voice for healing. The public's perception of her had transformed from an outspoken critic to a beacon of hope for a more honest, accountable military. But Maya knew that this transition was fragile. The institution was vast, and the people who had been exposed still held a significant amount of power. She found herself in meetings with high-ranking officials, navigating delicate negotiations about the future of military leadership and policy. Despite the triumph, there was still a tension in the air, the kind that comes with knowing that change, while necessary, doesn't come easily. One late afternoon, as Maya sat in a small conference room with members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. The reforms were in place, but the system hadn't yet purged itself entirely. There were still those who had learned how to navigate the cracks in the new system, still those who would attempt to subvert the progress she had worked so hard for. One of the senators, Senator Clark, had been particularly vocal throughout the reform process. He was a man with a reputation for being deeply entrenched in the old way of doing things. In the past, he had been a vocal opponent of the changes Maya had advocated for, and while the reforms had passed, he seemed to be playing a quiet, underhanded game, one that she couldn't quite figure out. The room was filled with murmurs as Senator Clark took the floor. "General Mitchell, we commend your dedication and your leadership throughout this unprecedented time," he said, his tone neutral, but Maya knew better. "However, some of us are concerned about the long-term consequences of these reforms. Have you truly considered the impact they might have on national security?" Maya's stomach tightened as she met his gaze, her thoughts racing. This was it. He was setting the stage to derail everything. "I've considered the impact carefully," she replied, her voice steady. "And I can assure you, Senator, these reforms will only strengthen national security. Accountability within our ranks makes us stronger, not weaker. What undermines national security is corruption, a lack of transparency, and the kind of power that is left unchecked." There was a brief silence as Clark let her words linger in the air. He was good. He knew exactly how to use doubt and fear to manipulate the conversation. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but history shows us that those who challenge the established order often find themselves overwhelmed by the very forces they sought to control." Maya didn't flinch. History also shows us that without challenge, those forces grow unchecked. This isn't about rejecting the system. It's about fixing what was broken, ensuring that our military is about honor, duty, and service, not about the interests of the powerful few. Her words hung in the air, and she could see the momentary discomfort in his eyes. She had known this conversation was coming. The final test would be finding a way to keep the reforms in place while rooting out the entrenched interests that still sought to protect the status quo. The next few days were filled with long nights and strategic planning. Maya's team was on alert, working behind the scenes to ensure the reforms would hold up against any sabotage attempts. But there was something more, a lingering unease that, despite the public victories, there was still a shadow within the military that she hadn't fully uprooted. Late one evening, as she sat in her office, Rachel called. Her voice was urgent, filled with an emotion Maya hadn't heard in weeks. "Maya, we've got a situation." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" "It's Senator Clark. He's pushing an amendment through the committee. It's a backdoor attempt to revoke several of the key reforms you fought for, specifically the transparency laws and the accountability measures for military contractors. He's trying to sneak it past the public, hoping no one will notice." Maya's pulse quickened. She knew this was the final test, the last challenge standing in the way of a true, sustainable change. "How close is he to getting it approved?" she asked, her mind already spinning into action. "Closer than we want to admit," Rachel replied. "We need to act fast. If he gets it passed in committee, it's going straight to the floor. And once it's there, it'll be harder to stop." Maya leaned forward, her thoughts crystallizing. "Then we stop him before it gets to the floor. We use everything we have, public support, media pressure, everything. We can't let this go unchecked." In the days that followed, Maya once again found herself on the front lines, not just of the military, but of a public battle. The media was once again her ally, but this time, it wasn't just about uncovering corruption. This was about fighting for the future of the military. She appeared on news programs, talked to reporters, and took to social media, rallying public support to put pressure on Congress to stop Clark's amendment. As the momentum built, so did the opposition. Clark and his allies began pushing back, trying to paint her as someone who was trying to undermine national security for the sake of her own personal vendetta. It was the same playbook they had used before, only now, the public wasn't buying it. The Senate floor was a battleground. Maya watched from the gallery as the debate raged on. Clark was relentless, but so was she. She had been fighting for this moment her entire life. She had bled for the military, sacrificed everything to ensure that those who served would never be treated like pawns again. When it was her turn to speak, she stood tall in front of the Senate, her voice cutting through the noise. "Senator Clark," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "the military is not a business. It is not a tool for power. It is a force for good, for service. And as much as you may try to twist these reforms into something dangerous, I am not fighting to make the military weaker. I am fighting to make it better. I'm fighting for those who deserve better. And I will not let you undo what we have built." The chamber fell silent. For the first time, Maya saw the cracks in Clark's armor. The truth was too powerful to deny. The reforms were going to stand. The vote came just days later. When the results were announced, the room exploded in a mix of relief and triumph. Clark's amendment had been defeated, and the reforms Maya had fought so hard for would remain intact. But Maya knew the victory was bittersweet. This wasn't over. The forces that had tried to subvert the system once could try again. There would always be more battles, more obstacles. But for now, she had won. And more importantly, the military had won. The people who served would never again be forgotten or silenced. The system had been changed, and it was only the beginning. As Maya stood in front of the crowd, her heart full, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She had come so far from where she had started. From that first courtroom, to the darkest moments of doubt, to this victory, she had found something stronger than herself, a movement that would never stop fighting for what was right. And as she looked out at the faces in the crowd, she knew one thing for certain. The fight wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever felt powerless, and for them, she would keep going, no matter the cost. The change was here, and Maya Mitchell would lead it, one battle at a time. In the weeks following the final defeat of Senator Clark's amendment, the country seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The military reforms had been solidified. For Maya, the weight of it all felt lighter, but she knew this wasn't the end. The system had been shifted, but it was still fragile, still susceptible to those who had spent years manipulating it for their own gain. Though her name was now synonymous with reform, Maya was never one to rest on her laurels. She knew that even the smallest crack in the foundation could allow the same old structures to rise again, like ghosts returning to haunt the living. Her team, Rachel included, had been vigilant, continuing to monitor the corridors of power for any signs of backsliding. Maya had spent years commanding soldiers on the battlefield, but now, the battlefield was political, just as brutal, just as demanding, but far more subtle. Her enemies wore suits, not uniforms, and they carried their weapons in briefcases, not in combat boots. But Maya had learned one thing from all of her trials. She could stand firm against anyone who thought they could intimidate her. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky outside her office with streaks of orange and red, Maya sat at her desk, reviewing the latest updates from her team. Rachel's voice came through the phone again, a familiar anchor in a sea of information. "Maya, we've got a situation," Rachel began, her tone low. "This isn't over." Maya leaned forward, bracing herself. "What's happened?" "I've been hearing whispers. Some of the more conservative factions in the military are trying to slowly undermine the transparency initiatives. They're pushing for budget cuts to programs related to oversight, trying to make it harder to track military spending. It's subtle, but it's happening." Maya's brow furrowed. "They're trying to go around the reforms quietly?" "Exactly. They know they can't repeal them outright, but they can chip away at them, make it harder to enforce. They're hoping people won't notice. Or if they do, they'll dismiss it as budgetary concerns." Maya stood up from her desk, walking over to the window, her eyes scanning the horizon. The fight she had thought was won had never truly ended. "What do we do?" "I'm going to need your voice again, Maya," Rachel said, the urgency clear in her voice. "We've got a new set of hearings coming up in Congress. If we don't step in now, they'll pull the rug out from under us. We can't afford to lose the momentum we've built." Maya exhaled, a mixture of exhaustion and determination settling in her chest. "I'm in. Let's make sure they don't get away with this." The weeks leading up to the next round of hearings were a blur of strategy and preparation. Maya threw herself into her work, her team doubling down on securing allies and gathering evidence to present to Congress. Rachel worked tirelessly behind the scenes, making sure that the reform's enemies wouldn't have the space to operate unnoticed. Maya gave speech after speech, attended rally after rally, and even met with key members of the military to make sure that there was no room for doubt. This was not the time to let up. But as the date of the hearing approached, the pressure began to mount. Maya knew that the tactics being used against them would be subtle. There would be no dramatic attacks like before, no courtroom battles or viral videos. This time, they were fighting an invisible enemy, one that would hide behind bureaucratic language and technicalities. On the night before the hearing, Maya sat alone in her office, reviewing her notes. The city lights below twinkled, but all she could focus on was the fight ahead. She had seen so much in her career: corruption, deception, betrayal. But none of that had ever dulled her resolve. She had made it this far by relying on one thing: the truth. Her phone rang, breaking her from her thoughts. Rachel's name flashed across the screen. "Got something new?" Maya asked. "I think we've finally caught them," Rachel replied, her voice filled with a mix of relief and excitement. "There's a memo, one of their internal emails about the budget cuts. It's a direct link to the people pushing for these changes. This could be the evidence we need to stop them before they get any further." Maya's pulse quickened. "Send it to me now. We've got one shot at this." The morning of the hearing arrived, and Maya stood before the committee once again. This time, she wasn't alone. Rachel and the rest of her team were in the wings, ready to provide backup and ensure that the evidence was presented with unassailable clarity. She had the memo in hand, ready to take her final swing. The committee chamber buzzed with activity, the usual parade of politicians and military officials moving in and out. Maya sat at the table, her hands clasped in front of her, her mind focused. She had to stay sharp. She couldn't let this opportunity slip by. When her turn came, she stood, her voice firm, commanding the attention of every person in the room. The atmosphere was charged, as if everyone present knew that this moment would determine whether the reforms she had worked so hard for would stand or fall. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, her voice clear, We are gathered here today because we know that the military must evolve. We know that the systems of power that have existed for decades cannot continue unchecked. We've made real progress, legislative, institutional, and moral. But I stand before you today to tell you that there are forces within the system working tirelessly to undo that progress. She paused, letting the words sink in. I have here a document that proves what we've feared. There are those who are using the guise of budgetary cuts to dismantle the very reforms we fought for. They are not doing this for the good of the country. They are doing this to maintain control over a system that was never meant to serve the people. With that, she placed the memo on the table, the words on it glaring up at the committee like an accusation. The changes we've made aren't just for us. They are for every soldier who deserves to be treated with dignity, for every taxpayer who expects their government to be accountable, and for every American who believes in the values this country was founded on. We cannot let these forces destroy the progress we've made. The room was silent. Maya could feel the tension building as the committee members exchanged glances, many of them reading the memo. Some were already shifting in their seats, others straightening up, their faces hardening with the realization that the game was up. For the next few hours, the discussion was intense. The opposition tried to argue, to muddy the waters, to distract from the evidence. But this time, they were caught in their own trap. The document was too damning, the evidence too clear. By the end of the hearing, it was clear Maya had won. The proposed budget cuts were blocked, and the reforms she had fought so hard for remained intact. As Maya stepped out of the hearing room, a quiet sense of triumph washed over her. This fight, like all the others, had taken everything she had, but she had done it. She had won again. Rachel was waiting for her outside, a relieved smile on her face. We did it, Maya. They can't touch the reforms now. Maya nodded, her exhaustion catching up with her. We've won for now, but we can't stop. We have to stay vigilant. The system will always try to fight back. Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. You've done more than anyone could have expected. You've changed everything. Maya looked out over the city, the sun setting on another chapter of her fight. She had started this journey as a soldier, driven by a sense of duty and honor. But now, she knew something deeper. This was her purpose. To lead. To fight. To never stop challenging the status quo. And as the future unfolded before her, Maya Mitchell knew one thing for sure. She would keep fighting, no matter what. Because the fight for truth, justice, and integrity wasn't just a battle. It was a lifelong commitment. And she was ready for whatever came next. The days after the hearing were a whirlwind, but they didn't feel like victories, not yet. Maya knew that despite the immense pressure that had been put on her, there were still forces lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to undo the progress they had made. But for now, she could breathe a little easier. Her phone buzzed again that evening, and she didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Rachel's voice had become a steady presence in the chaos. Maya, we've got something, Rachel said, her tone sharp with purpose. Maya straightened, her mind immediately alert. What's going on? The memo you dropped in the committee, it's gone viral. Every news outlet has picked it up, and it's everywhere. But it's not just the media coverage. It's starting to shift the public perception. This time, they can't ignore it. They're scrambling to find a way to spin this, but it's getting harder for them to downplay the truth. Maya let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was a small win, but a powerful one. That's good news. Keep the pressure up. We can't let this moment fade away. I'll handle it, Rachel replied. But there's another problem brewing, something you might want to know about before it gets bigger. Maya's curiosity piqued. What do you mean? There's been talk among some of the more radical factions within the military, especially among the contractors. They're not backing down quietly. They're preparing to escalate. Some of them are setting their sights on a bigger target now. You. Maya's chest tightened. She had known the fight wasn't over, but hearing Rachel say it out loud made it more real. What kind of escalation are we talking about? I don't have all the details, but they're leveraging old connections, and they might be using their influence to start a smear campaign. We're talking about high-profile attacks on your character, trying to discredit you at the most vulnerable moment. Maya stared out the window, her gaze distant. She had faced this kind of sabotage before, the whispers, the rumors, the undermining of everything she stood for. But this time, it felt different. This time, they were desperate. We'll be ready, Maya said firmly. We have to be prepared for anything. The next few weeks were a delicate balance of vigilance and preparation. Maya's team worked around the clock to bolster her public image, anticipating every angle of attack. They reached out to journalists, influential figures, and allies who had stood by her during the toughest moments. Every piece of information was scrutinized, every potential weak point addressed. The system of allies she had built over the years now became her strongest defense. But the smear campaign came, just as Rachel had warned. The first articles were subtle, anonymously sourced reports suggesting that Maya had been more interested in personal gain than the greater good, that her push for reform was driven by political ambition rather than a genuine desire to help the military. At first, it felt like a single shot fired into a calm sea. But soon, the articles started coming faster. Rumors about her personal life, about her time in the military, about her leadership methods. It was the kind of stuff she'd been prepared for, but it still stung. They were trying to take her down in a way that was calculated, meticulous, painting her as someone who couldn't be trusted, someone who had an agenda. Maya didn't let it show. Not in public. Not to the people who depended on her. She had been through enough to know that this was just another part of the battle. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day filled with meetings and media appearances, she sat alone in her apartment. The weight of the campaign against her hung heavy, and she let herself feel the full force of it for a moment. Anger, frustration, and exhaustion. But just as quickly, she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to let it consume her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from General Pierce. Maya, they're pushing back harder now. We need to talk. Urgent. Maya didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone immediately. What's going on? I've got word from a source inside the system. They've got plans for more than just a smear campaign. They're planning a political attack, something more direct, an attempt to cut you out of the conversation entirely. They're trying to push you into a corner where you can't move, can't fight back. Maya's pulse quickened. She had anticipated this kind of attack, but it still made her heart race. What are they going to do? They've been working behind the scenes to isolate you politically. They're getting ready to target your support in Congress, undermining the influence you've built with some of the key reformists who've been backing you. Maya's mind spun. She had known this day would come, but now that it was here, it felt more real than ever. They weren't just attacking her reputation, they were going after her very ability to fight back. What do we do? Maya asked, her voice steady. We hit back before they can strike, Pierce said firmly. We go after their weak points. We dig into their connections, their finances. We expose everything they've been trying to hide. If we act quickly, we can cut the ground out from under them before they gain any real traction. Maya nodded, resolve hardening within her. She wasn't going to let them take her down again. Not without a fight. I'll mobilize my team. Let's get to work. The next few weeks felt like a war of attrition. Every day was a new fight. Media attacks, pressure from within Congress, leaks designed to sow doubt among her allies. But Maya and her team were relentless. They fought fire with fire, using the same tactics to expose the connections between her opponents and the military-industrial complex. Through it all, Maya remained a steady, visible presence. She refused to let the attacks shake her. She spoke at rallies, participated in debates, and constantly made her case to the American people. She knew that this wasn't just a battle for her reputation. It was a battle for the future of the military and the values she had spent her life fighting for. The moment of reckoning came when one of Maya's key allies, a respected senator, publicly announced his support for her reform movement. His endorsement sent shockwaves through the opposition, and for the first time, the smear campaign began to lose steam. But just when things seemed to be turning in her favor, the opposition made one final, desperate move. They tried to discredit the very reforms that had given Maya her strength. A bill was introduced that sought to roll back the most significant aspects of her work, targeting transparency laws and accountability measures. It was now or never. The final showdown took place in a packed Senate chamber. Maya stood at the podium, her eyes scanning the room. The opposition was sitting across from her, their faces tense, waiting for her to speak. She knew that this was the moment that would define everything. She spoke calmly, but her words were powerful. You can try to take back what we've built. You can push through your bills, your amendments, your lies. But you cannot take away the truth. You cannot silence the people who have already seen the light. This system, this military, belongs to the American people. It belongs to those who serve, those who risk everything. You do not own it, and you will not undo the progress we've made." The chamber was silent. For a moment, it seemed like the room itself was holding its breath. "This isn't just my fight," she continued. "This is the fight of every person who believes in accountability, in integrity, in honor. This is the fight for the future, and I will not let you take it from us." The vote was held hours later. The roll call was tense, but Maya's allies, bolstered by the public outcry and the relentless pressure, stood firm. The bill to roll back the reforms was defeated. Maya had won again, but as she walked out of the Senate chamber, she knew that the battle was never really over. There would always be more challenges, more obstacles, more forces trying to maintain the status quo. But now, she understood something with absolute clarity. As long as she drew breath, she would fight. Because the truth, once exposed, could never be buried again. The fight wasn't just hers. It was everyone's. And she would keep fighting for them, for the military, for the future. Because the truth was worth it. And she would never stop.